What if the one part of Iran that felt untouchable just got proven wrong overnight? For weeks, the north was the quiet zone. Tehran slept easier than the coast did. That safety just ended. Before we go any further, do 3 quick things for me. Hit like if you want more breakdowns like this one. Subscribe if this is your first time here, because this story is moving fast and you don't want to miss what comes next. And send this to one person who still thinks this war is only happening near the coast because they need to see this too. Now let's actually get into what happened, because the details here are bigger than one night of explosions. And once you understand them, the whole shape of this war starts to look different. To understand why this matters so much, you need to understand the pattern that had defined this war up until this exact moment. For days, the fighting followed a rhythm you could almost set your watch to. Every American strike landed near the water. Bandar Abbas, Qasem Island, the naval choke points that guard the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's southern coastline absorbed the pressure night after night, while its northern interior sat back and watched from a distance. Tehran itself, along with the quieter provinces further inland, stayed mostly untouched. That gap wasn't random. It became something Iranian military planners appeared to count on, a kind of unspoken boundary that this war seemed to respect, even while everything south of it burned. Then, in the early hours of Thursday, that boundary broke completely. American forces, operating under Central Command, confirmed they had struck targets stretching into Iran's north for the first time in this specific stretch of fighting, not just somewhere near Tehran. Inside Semnan Province, a region most people outside Iran have probably never heard of, but one that matters enormously to how this country builds its weapons. Here's why that single detail changes the entire shape of this war. Semnan isn't a naval base. It isn't a port city. It's where Iran manufactures its ballistic missiles and runs major parts of its space program. Missile technology and space launch technology overlap more than most people realize. The same propulsion research, the same guidance systems, the same production lines, often the same engineers moving between both projects. So when a strike lands in Semnan, it isn't hitting a symbolic target somewhere far from the action. It's hitting the actual machinery that builds the weapons Iran has been firing at its neighbors for weeks. For years, analysts have pointed to Semnan as one of the most closely watched sites in Iran's entire weapons infrastructure, precisely because of that overlap between missile development and space technology. A strike there isn't a message. It's an attempt to physically slow down how quickly Iran can rebuild whatever gets destroyed elsewhere in this war. Iranian state media confirmed the strike hit Semnan's airport directly, along with a storage facility in the same city. Officials there said no one was killed and that the surrounding neighborhoods were left untouched. Whatever side of this conflict you find yourself sympathizing with, that detail is worth noting. Precision, even inside a war zone, still says something about intent. But the story doesn't stop in Semnan. Reports from inside Iran describe a night of strikes spread across an almost unbelievable stretch of the country. Areas around Avaz were hit. A wheat storage facility in Hovizeh took damage. Explosions were reported near Dasht-e-Azadagan. Further south, in Hormozgan province, strikes hit parts of Bandar Abbas, Sirik, and Qasem Island, including a fish processing plant that local reports say was seriously damaged. Meanwhile, in the southwestern city of Avaz, residents described hearing explosions rattle through the night, almost the exact moment CENTCOM's statement about the new wave went public. Picture that map for a second. From the deep south near Bandar Abbas, through the southwest around Ahvaz, and now all the way up into Tehran and Semnan in the north. One single night. That's not a narrow, contained operation. That's one of the widest spreads of targets this entire round of the war has produced so far. And Tehran itself is where this story becomes personal. Iranian state outlets reported air defense systems activating across several parts of the capital in the early morning hours. Tasnim, a news agency tied to Iran's Revolutionary Guard, said defenses were active on both the eastern and western sides of the city. One Tehran resident described being jolted awake by a loud blast in the middle of the night. We can't say for certain whether that explosion came from a direct hit inside the city itself, or from the shockwave of nearby strikes further out. But either way, something fundamental changed that night. A capital that had spent most of this war feeling somewhat shielded just had its own residents woken up by war happening in real time, above their own rooftops. Iran's health ministry has confirmed dozens of deaths and several hundred injuries since this latest round of fighting resumed, a grim reminder that behind every strategic detail in this story, there are real families living through real fear every single night. One hospital in Avaz reportedly had to evacuate more than 200 patients after strikes hit nearby, a detail that rarely makes it into the bigger geopolitical headlines, but one that says more about the human cost of this war than any map of targets ever could. It's easy to talk about provinces and coordinates and forget that every one of these locations is also somebody's neighborhood. A missile production facility in Semnan sits near homes. A port in Bandar Abbas sits near families who've lived there for generations. War reporting has a way of flattening all of that into strategy and target lists, but it's worth pausing, just for a moment, to remember that every single location named in this story is also somewhere real people were sleeping when the strikes came, waking up not to headlines, but to actual sound and actual fear, long before any of it reached a screen. So why would the United States choose to expand its target list now, deep into territory it had mostly avoided until this point? CENTCOM's own explanation gives us a clue. Officials said the strikes hit Iranian command centers, air defense systems, missile and drone facilities, and coastal surveillance sites, all with the stated goal of protecting commercial ships moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Precision weapons were used against multiple locations, including Bandar Abbas, home to Iran's largest port, along with major Navy and Revolutionary Guard facilities. Notice something important buried inside that statement. Even while striking deep into the north, the reason given stays tied to the exact same goal that has defined this entire war, keeping shipping lanes open and commercial vessels safe. But there's a second effect hiding underneath that first one, and it's arguably more important. Every air defense site that goes down, no matter where it happens to sit on the map, makes it easier and safer for American aircraft to strike anywhere else in the country next. Taking out defenses in the north doesn't just protect ships in the south, it quietly opens the door for whatever comes after this. And this wasn't a single strike happening in isolation. It was the third wave of American action within one single day. The morning began with a 90-minute assault on Greater Tunb Island. The afternoon brought a second wave, aimed specifically at capabilities Iran has been using to threaten vessels in the strait. And the evening closed out with this northern expansion, the wave that finally broke the pattern everyone had gotten used to. Morning, afternoon, evening. 3 separate operations, 3 separate objectives, all inside 24 hours. It's worth remembering how this entire naval standoff actually started, because it explains why the strait keeps showing up in almost every single statement from CENTCOM. Back in April, the United States imposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports, aiming to stop vessels tied to Iran from freely leaving the strait. American officials have estimated that blockade alone cost Iran close to $5 billion in lost oil revenue within just its first month. That's the kind of economic pressure that explains a lot about why Iran keeps trying to test the blockade with tankers, and why the United States keeps responding so aggressively every time one tries. That context also explains something else people often miss. Israel isn't a silent bystander in any of this. The strikes that reignited this war back in late February were a joint operation between the United States and Israel, aimed at crippling Iran's military leadership and its broader warfighting capability in one coordinated move. That joint history is still shaping decisions being made today, even on nights when Israeli aircraft aren't the ones in the sky. Every American strike happening right now is landing inside a war that already involves more than one determined opponent facing Iran at once. All right, let's pause here for a second, because I genuinely want your take on this. If this breakdown is giving you a clearer picture than what you're seeing elsewhere, tap that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells this channel exactly what kind of coverage to keep making. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment, because the next update on this story could drop before you know it. And if a friend of yours keeps sending you confusing headlines about this war, send them this video instead, so they actually understand what's happening. Now here's where this gets even more serious, because the man giving the orders isn't hiding his intentions anymore. President Trump, speaking this week, said Iran wants to settle so badly, and added that the world would soon find out whether a deal gets made or whether, in his words, they just finish them off. That's a considerably sharper tone than anything we heard from him during earlier stages of this conflict, when his public language leaned more toward pressure and negotiation than open finality. He didn't stop there. After landing in Pennsylvania for a defense summit, Trump addressed his earlier warning about striking Iranian infrastructure, things like power plants and bridges, the kind of targets that would affect ordinary civilians far more directly than a military base. He said he doesn't like handing out deadlines, but that Iran already knows exactly what's at stake. He warned that Iran had better make a deal, or it would have nothing left standing. And according to people familiar with his thinking, this northern expansion may not be a one-time move at all. Sources say Trump is actively considering whether to widen the scope of this military operation even further. Combine that with the fact that Tehran and Semnan were just struck for the first time in this phase of fighting, and a pattern starts to form. This doesn't look like a limited, contained adjustment. It looks like the opening move of something considerably bigger still to come. Language like "finish them off" tends to get used loosely in casual conversation, but coming from a sitting president discussing an active war, it carries real weight. It signals that the current strategy of contained, targeted strikes might not be the final chapter here. Whether that means broader strikes on infrastructure, an even wider geographic footprint, or simply harder pressure at the negotiating table, the message underneath the words is the same. Washington no longer seems interested in managing this conflict quietly. It wants a resolution one way or another, and it wants it clearly, on its own terms. While all of this was happening, Iran wasn't sitting still either. Kuwait's armed forces reported their air defenses intercepting hostile drones launched from Iranian territory. Jordan's military said it shot down 8 Iranian missiles early Thursday morning, with officials confirming there were no casualties and no damage from that particular incident. This has become a near nightly rhythm at this point. Iran striking back at nations hosting American forces, regardless of where the United States chooses to strike on any given night. Neither side appears willing to let a single night pass without some form of response. The financial world is watching all of this extremely closely, and the numbers tell their own quiet story. Brent crude, the international oil benchmark, has been trading above $85 a barrel as strikes near the Strait of Hormuz continue disrupting the flow of oil and gas through one of the most important shipping corridors on the entire planet. Earlier in the week, prices spiked to a one-month high after Trump announced the United States would reimpose its naval blockade on Iranian ports. American crude, the domestic benchmark, has been sitting just under $80 a barrel. Both figures remain well above where they stood before this war reignited, even after cooling slightly from their peak. There's another piece of this story that doesn't get talked about enough, and it affects people who have absolutely nothing to do with the fighting at all. Europe's own aviation safety regulator issued a formal warning, stating plainly that the heightened activity of national and American air defense systems raises the risk of misidentification, accidental engagement, and unintended harm to civilian aircraft. The agency added that unpredictable military movement combined with missiles, drones, combat jets, and active air defense systems creates a genuinely high risk to civilian flights at every altitude, not just near the ground. This isn't a statement coming from either side of the war. It's an independent safety assessment from Europe's own regulatory body, and airlines around the world are already responding to it. Air Canada canceled flights to both Tel Aviv and Dubai. Aegean Airlines, Greece's largest carrier, suspended service to Dubai, Istanbul, and Baghdad. Air France paused flights to Beirut. KLM halted service to Riyadh, Dammam, and Dubai. Cathay Pacific delayed its return to Dubai and Riyadh by several weeks. This is a real measurable disruption to global air travel, spreading across multiple continents and multiple major airlines at the same time, all because of a war most passengers will never directly witness, yet somehow still can't fully escape. Think about what that actually means logistically. Millions of travel plans quietly rerouted. Cargo flights, carrying medicine, electronics, and everyday goods, forced onto longer, more expensive paths around the region. Airlines absorbing costs that eventually land on ticket prices everywhere, not just in the Gulf. A war fought largely along one narrow strip of water in a handful of provinces is somehow reaching into flight schedules on nearly every continent. And that ripple effect is exactly why this story deserves more attention than a single scrolling headline. Beyond Kuwait and Jordan, other countries hosting American forces across the Gulf have quietly raised their own alert levels, even without issuing loud public statements about it. When a war produces near-nightly missile activity across multiple countries at once, that tension doesn't stay contained to just the two main combatants. It spreads outward into the daily routines of millions of people who never asked to live near a war zone and who now check the news every morning simply to know whether their city made the list overnight. There's also a parallel operation running underneath all of this, one connected directly to the naval blockade Trump announced earlier this week. This latest round of missile activity actually began when American forces fired on a tanker's fuel section after officials said the ship ignored repeated warnings while allegedly trying to slip past the blockade. And that detail matters, because it means two separate campaigns. The strikes happening across Iran and the naval enforcement effort happening at sea are actually running as one single coordinated operation, rather than two disconnected stories that just happen to be unfolding at the same time. To understand how big a shift this northern expansion really represents, it helps to zoom out and look at how this entire war even began. This conflict reignited after the United States and Israel launched large-scale strikes on Iran back in late February, an operation that dramatically escalated tensions across the entire region almost overnight. Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz almost immediately, sending oil prices, fertilizer costs, and global shipping expenses climbing worldwide, and giving Iran real leverage in the earliest stages of the standoff. A fragile pause followed for a while, an uneasy quiet that many hoped might hold. That pause has now fully collapsed, and what we're watching today is being described plainly, by multiple sources on the ground, as a full return to open war. Up until this latest wave, American strikes had stayed heavily concentrated in the south, close to the Strait of Hormuz, where the naval blockade fight has been centered from the very beginning. This move into Tehran and Semnan marks the first real break from that pattern since this specific round of fighting began. That's not a small technical footnote buried somewhere in a briefing. That's a genuine shift in strategy playing out in real time, right in front of all of us. It also helps to remember that this isn't the first time tension between these two nations has flared up over the years. Decades of sanctions, proxy conflicts, and failed negotiations have shaped the relationship between Washington and Tehran long before this specific war ever began. What makes this moment different isn't the existence of conflict itself, it's the speed and the openness of it. Strikes confirmed within hours, casualty figures released the same day, statements from a sitting president delivered almost casually to reporters after landing for an unrelated summit. This war is playing out in near real time, documented, confirmed, and argued over publicly, in a way that older rounds of tension between these two countries rarely were. And Semnan deserves one more moment of attention, because its significance goes far beyond a single night's damage report. Iran's missile program and its space program share deep technical roots. The same propulsion research, the same guidance engineering, often the same manufacturing base entirely. A strike specifically targeting infrastructure in this province suggests American planners may be starting to look past the weapons already deployed along the coast, and instead aiming at the source, the actual production capability that keeps replacing whatever gets destroyed somewhere else. That's a fundamentally different kind of target than a naval base or a port facility. That's aiming at the root of the tree instead of the branches hanging off it. Before we head into the final stretch of this story, here's one more thing I'll ask of you. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about getting the real picture instead of just another dramatic headline, so drop a comment letting me know which detail in this video surprised you the most. I read these, and honestly, your comments shape what I dig into next, so let's bring all of this together and look at exactly where things stand right now. For the first time in this current round of fighting, American forces have struck deep into Iran's north, hitting Tehran itself in Semnan Province, the region responsible for Iran's missile production and space infrastructure. This happened as the third wave of strikes within a single day, following a morning assault on Greater Tunb Island and an afternoon operation aimed directly at threats to shipping in the strait. Air defense systems activated across Tehran, waking residents in the middle of the night and shattering whatever sense of distance the capital once had from this war. Trump has confirmed he's weighing whether to expand this operation even further, while continuing to threaten Iranian infrastructure without committing to any firm deadline for when that might happen. Kuwait and Jordan both confirmed fresh Iranian retaliation on their own territory within the same window. Oil prices remain well above where they sat before this war reignited, a quiet but constant reminder of how far this conflict's reach actually extends. And Europe's Aviation Safety Agency has issued a direct warning about the genuine danger this expanding conflict now poses to civilian flights anywhere near the region. Every one of those threads, the strikes, the retaliation, the oil markets, the grounded flights, is connected to the same single decision made in the early hours of Thursday morning, the decision to finally cross into Iran's north. That's what makes this moment worth pausing on. It isn't just another entry on a long list of strikes. It's the moment the boundaries of this entire war visibly shifted, and everyone watching, from oil traders to airline executives to families in Tehran, felt that shift almost immediately. What we're watching isn't just one dramatic night of headlines. It's a pattern shifting in real time, a war that just proved no part of Iran is actually out of reach anymore. The coast was never the whole story here. The north was always part of the map, even when the strikes hadn't caught up to that fact yet. Now they have. Think about what that actually means for the weeks ahead. If Semnan was the first crack in that northern boundary, the next question is whether more northern and central provinces follow the same path. Trump's own comments about weighing a wider operation suggest this administration isn't treating the current scope as final, and Iran's continued retaliation against Kuwait and Jordan suggests Tehran isn't backing down either, even while absorbing strikes deeper into its own territory than at any point in this specific phase of the war. Two sides, neither one blinking, and a map that keeps getting wider by the night. There's also the diplomatic angle sitting quietly underneath all of this. Regional governments and international bodies have repeatedly called for restraint since this war reignited in February, yet the strikes have only expanded since those calls were made. That gap between public diplomatic pressure and the reality unfolding on the ground tells you something honest about where this conflict actually stands right now. Statements alone haven't slowed it down. Only facts on the ground, strikes, blockades, and retaliation, seem to be shaping what happens next. Three scenarios seem realistic from here. One, this stays a limited northern operation, aimed purely at clearing air defenses, so future southern strikes face less resistance, and the war largely returns to its coastal rhythm. Two, this becomes the first step in a genuinely wider campaign with more central and northern provinces drawn in over the coming weeks, following Trump's own comments about expanding the operation. Three, the pressure from all sides, military losses, oil disruption, grounded flights, and mounting casualties, eventually forces both sides back toward some kind of negotiated pause, the way the earlier ceasefire briefly did months ago. Right now, nothing in the public record rules out any of those three paths, which is exactly why this moment matters so much. Here's my honest question for you, and I actually want a real answer in the comments, not just a quick reaction. Do you think this northern strike marks the start of a genuinely wider campaign across Iran's interior? Or was this a one-time move designed purely to clear the way for more strikes down south later on? Type your answer below, because I read every single one, and I genuinely want to see where this community actually lands on it. If you want the next update the moment it breaks, with the same level of care and the same commitment to getting the details right, subscribing is the only real way to guarantee you don't miss it. This war is not slowing down, and honestly, neither are we. One night changed the map, the next night could change it again, and whatever happens next, you'll want to actually understand it, not just scroll past it. I'll see you in the next one.